what if I told you there's a country where the president once renamed the months after his mother and grandmother, where gold teeth were banned because they looked unnatural, and where you need government permission just to leave the capital city? Welcome to Turkmenistan, a nation so bizarre and secretive that it makes North Korea look like a tourist paradise. This Central Asian country sits on some of the world's largest natural gas reserves, yet most of its 5 million citizens live under restrictions that would make your average prison warden uncomfortable. Today, I'm taking you inside this marble-clad mystery with nothing but $500 in my pocket and a tourist visa that's harder to get than front-row tickets to a sold-out concert. But here's the plot twist that nobody sees coming. Despite all the crazy rules, government surveillance, and bureaucratic nightmares, Turkmenistan might just surprise you with its incredible hospitality, mind-blowing architecture, and a culture that somehow managed to survive centuries of conquest and control. So buckle up, because we're about to enter a world where reality consistently defeats fiction, where every dollar counts when you're trying to survive in one of Earth's most isolated nations, and where the line between authentic culture and government theater becomes so blurred that you'll question everything you thought you knew about travel. From the moment your plane touches down in Ashgabat, you realize you've crossed into a different dimension entirely. The airport gleams with more marble and gold than most royal palaces, looking like someone decided to build a transportation hub inside the Palace of Versailles. But don't let all this opulence fool you for a second. This is just the opening act of a countrywide performance where everything has been designed to impress visitors, even when the reality behind those marble curtains tells a completely different story. Turkmenistan stretches across 189,000 square miles of mostly empty desert, making it slightly smaller than California, but with roughly 140 times fewer people living in it. The Karakum Desert covers approximately 80% of the entire country. And when I say desert, I don't mean some romantic Lawrence of Arabia landscape with gentle sand dunes and occasional oases. This is serious, life-threatening, your GPS will give up and your car will become a metal coffin kind of desert terrain. The geography here reads like someone took a science fiction novel and decided to make it reality just to see what would happen. Right in the middle of this seemingly endless wasteland, there's a giant hole in the ground that's been burning continuously since 1971, and locals have nicknamed it the Door to Hell. After seeing this thing illuminate the night sky like Earth's most expensive and dangerous campfire, I honestly can't argue with that description. The story behind this flaming crater perfectly captures Turkmenistan's relationship with its abundant natural resources. Back in 1971, Soviet engineers were drilling for natural gas deposits when the ground suddenly collapsed, creating a 230-foot wide crater that started leaking dangerous methane gas into the atmosphere. Their brilliant solution? Light it on fire, figuring it would burn off safely in a few days. Well, 50-plus years later, it's still burning like the world's most persistent barbecue pit, consuming millions of cubic feet of natural gas that could power entire cities. This flaming hole in the desert serves as a perfect metaphor for Turkmenistan as entire approach to resource management. The country sits on the world's fourth-largest proven natural gas reserves, enough energy to power half of Europe for decades, yet most citizens struggle to afford adequate heating during the brutal desert winters. It's like discovering a gold mine in your backyard, but continuing to eat ramen noodles because you can't figure out how to turn rocks into groceries. The Soviet legacy runs much deeper than just burning geological accidents scattered across the landscape. From 1924 to 1991, Turkmenistan existed as the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic, and Moscow treated this territory like their personal energy supply warehouse with people attached. The Soviets constructed entire cities, built extensive infrastructure networks, and established a complete education system designed primarily to serve Russian economic and political interests rather than local needs. When independence finally arrived in 1991, the country inherited all this Soviet-era infrastructure, but also found itself with a population that had been systematically disconnected from their pre-Soviet cultural traditions, languages, and social systems. The climate in this region doesn't mess around with gradual temperature changes or comfortable seasonal transitions. Summer temperatures regularly climb above 120 degrees Celsius in whatever shade you can manage to find, assuming you're lucky enough to locate any shade at all. Winter temperatures can plummet below freezing, creating this bizarre desert environment where you might legitimately need both high SPF sunscreen and a heavy winter coat during the same 24-hour period. The local population has adapted to these extreme environmental conditions over the course of many centuries, developing a sophisticated culture that treats water as more precious than gold and considers shade to be valuable real estate worth fighting over. Traditional architecture reflects these priorities, with thick walls, small windows, and interior courtyards designed to create cool spaces during the scorching summer months while retaining heat during the freezing winter nights. Walking through the streets of Ashgabat feels like touring an elaborate movie set where the director forgot to hire background actors and the main characters are all running mysteriously late. The buildings surrounding you are absolutely magnificent. Gleaming white marble surfaces and gold decorative elements everywhere your eyes can focus. But the streets remain eerily empty of human activity, creating an atmosphere that's simultaneously impressive and deeply unsettling. This isn't because people don't actually live in these marble palaces or work in these golden office buildings. The emptiness exists because daily life operates according to a complex system of spoken and unspoken rules, regulations, and social expectations that would make your head spin faster than a carnival ride if you tried to understand them all at once. Television programming consists almost entirely of state-controlled content featuring the current president, various government achievements, celebrations of traditional Turkmen culture, and educational programs designed to reinforce officially approved messages about history, politics, and social values. International news gets filtered through such a thick lens of government interpretation that you'd need a telescope to see any resemblance to actual events happening in the outside world. The internet exists here, technically speaking, but calling it internet is like calling a tricycle a vehicle, accurate but misleading about actual capabilities. Connection speeds move slower than dial-up from the 1990s. Most international websites are completely blocked. And the few sites that do work load so slowly that you could probably walk to the physical server location faster than waiting for a single web page to appear on your screen. Yet, somehow, despite all these restrictions and limitations, life continues with a rhythm that's uniquely and authentically Turkmen. Extended families gather in traditional courtyards every evening for elaborate tea ceremonies, sharing stories, gossip, and family news. Despite everyone understanding that walls often have ears and conversations might be monitored by people whose job descriptions include paying attention to what citizens discuss privately. The older generation speaks Russian fluently thanks to their Soviet educational experience, while younger people navigate daily life using a complex mixture of Turkmen Russian and whatever fragments of English they've managed to pick up from smuggled movies, music, and the occasional international visitor brave enough or crazy enough to attempt independent travel in this controlled environment. Dress codes here are not suggestions or cultural preferences. They're serious business with real consequences for violations. Women are expected to dress conservatively at all times, covering their arms and legs completely, and many choose to wear traditional Turkmen dresses that are actually quite beautiful. These aren't simple garments but elaborate works of textile art, flowing fabrics in rich, vibrant colors featuring intricate embroidery patterns that tell stories about regional origins, family histories, and social status to anyone educated enough to read these visual narratives. Men typically stick to Western-style clothing, but even they need to exercise careful judgment about their appearance. Anything too flashy, expensive-looking, or attention-grabbing can attract unwanted scrutiny from authorities who might start wondering where you obtained the financial resources for such luxurious items, and those conversations rarely end well for anyone involved. What strikes visitors most powerfully about daily social interactions is the incredible warmth and genuine hospitality that somehow manages to flourish despite all the governmental restrictions and surveillance systems. Turkmen people have mastered the subtle art of communication through knowing glances, meaningful pauses, and carefully chosen words that convey much more than their literal meanings might suggest. They'll invite complete strangers to join them for tea without bothering to learn your name first. Share their food, even when it's obviously clear they don't have abundance to spare. And somehow manage to find reasons to laugh and express joy even in circumstances that would drive most people to despair or rebellion. The generational divide creates fascinating social dynamics that play out in daily interactions throughout the country. Older Turkmen citizens remember life before independence and often speak with genuine nostalgia about Soviet times when, despite all the political restrictions and ideological limitations, basic necessities like food, housing, health care, and education were more reliable and accessible than they are today. Middle-aged adults lived through the chaotic transition period and the wild early years of independence, experiences that have made them incredibly resourceful, adaptable, and skilled at navigating complex bureaucratic systems while maintaining their dignity and family relationships. Young people are growing up as the first generation with access to smartphones and digital technology, but without any meaningful access to social media or international internet platforms, creating this unique demographic of digital natives who are simultaneously connected to global technology and completely isolated from global culture. If you're planning to survive on a strict $500 budget in Turkmenistan, you better prepare yourself to develop a deep, meaningful relationship with plov, the undisputed national dish that appears at literally every meal like a delicious rice-based stalker who refuses to take social hints. This isn't just any ordinary rice dish that you might find at your neighborhood international restaurant. This represents a legitimate art form that's been perfected over centuries of nomadic life and cultural evolution. Authentic Turkmen plov combines mutton or beef with carrots, onions, and perfectly seasoned rice, all slow-cooked together in massive metal pots called kazans until every ingredient melds into something that somehow manages to taste like comfort food, even if you've never experienced anything remotely similar in your entire culinary life history. The economic beauty of plov lies in its incredible affordability and universal availability throughout the country. Street vendors sell heaping satisfying portions for approximately 3 to 5 manats, which translates to roughly 1 to 2, using realistic exchange rates, making it the perfect budget traveler sustenance that won't destroy your financial planning before the end of your first week. But here's the cultural catch that nobody warns you about in advance. Plov is traditionally consumed by hand directly from communal plates shared among multiple people, which means you're not simply purchasing lunch. You're buying admission to a social experience that comes with unspoken rules, cultural expectations, and relationship obligations. Refusing to participate in communal plov consumption is theoretically possible, but culturally equivalent to rejecting a handshake or declining to make eye contact during conversation. Technically legal, but socially awkward enough to create lasting negative impressions. Kebabs represent the second most important category in the national food hierarchy. But these aren't your typical backyard barbecue varieties that Americans might recognize from summer cookouts. Turkmen kebabs are serious business. Substantial chunks of meat grilled over open flames by master craftsmen who've been perfecting their techniques since childhood under the guidance of fathers and grandfathers who learned from their own ancestors. The meat is typically mutton or goat, marinated using simple spice combinations that somehow create incredibly complex flavor profiles through techniques that seem almost magical to outsiders unfamiliar with Central Asian cooking traditions. A complete kebab meal including flatbread and fresh vegetables costs approximately 8 to 12 manats, 3 to 4, making it an affordable luxury when the endless repetition of plov starts affecting your mental health and culinary enthusiasm. The real cultural and social centers of Turkmen society aren't fancy restaurants or government-approved entertainment venues, but rather chaykhanas, traditional tea houses that function simultaneously as business meeting rooms, gossip distribution centers, philosophical debate clubs, and informal community centers, where people gather to maintain social connections that might otherwise be difficult to sustain under current political conditions. These establishments typically occupy traditional courtyard spaces or simple indoor areas furnished with low tables and comfortable cushions arranged to encourage conversation and social interaction. The tea service follows ceremonial protocols that have remained unchanged for generations. Green tea served in small glasses constantly refilled by attentive hosts, accompanied by sugar cubes, dried fruits, nuts, and various small snacks that appear and disappear throughout extended social sessions. What makes Chaikanas particularly special and culturally significant is their unique role as neutral social territory in a country where public gatherings are generally viewed with suspicion by authorities. Tea houses somehow manage to exist as spaces where people can relax their guard slightly and speak more freely about topics that might be dangerous to discuss in other public settings. Conversations in these spaces range from innocent family news and business negotiations to carefully coded discussions about politics, economics, and life beyond Turkmenistan's heavily controlled borders. The art lies in knowing which topics can be addressed directly, which require metaphorical language, and which should be avoided entirely regardless of who might be listening. Dairy products hold almost sacred status in traditional Turkmen cuisine, directly reflecting the country's nomadic heritage and the central importance of livestock in historical survival strategies. Fresh yogurt, various locally produced cheeses, and fermented mare's milk, called chow, appear regularly on family tables and restaurant menus throughout the country. Chow represents a particularly acquired taste that challenges even adventurous food travelers. Imagine slightly alcoholic, distinctly sour milk with a consistency and flavor profile unlike anything available in Western markets. However, local residents swear by its health benefits, cultural significance, and role in maintaining connection to ancestral traditions that predate both Soviet influence and Islamic conversion. At approximately 2 manats per glass, less than 1, chow also represents budget-friendly nutrition, assuming your digestive system can handle the adventure, and your taste buds can adapt to flavors that might initially seem more like punishment than refreshment. Melons deserve their own dedicated discussion because Turkmenistan takes its melon production seriously enough to make it a matter of national pride and international reputation. The country produces over 400 distinct varieties, and melon season transforms into something resembling a national holiday where normal business activities temporarily take second priority to melon-related celebrations and consumption. These aren't your typical grocery store melons with their disappointing flavor and texture compromises designed for long-distance shipping and extended shelf life. Turkmen melons are sweet enough to serve as dessert courses, juicy enough to function as beverages during desert heat, and affordable enough that you could theoretically survive on nothing but melons for weeks without destroying your budget or your health. During peak season, which typically runs from late summer through early fall, you can purchase a complete melon for 5 to 8 manats, 2 to 3, representing exceptional nutritional and economic value that makes fresh fruit accessible even to travelers operating under severe financial constraints. The primary challenge with maintaining a strict 500 budget isn't finding affordable food options. Local cuisine provides excellent nutrition at remarkably low prices. The real difficulty lies in finding variety and avoiding the psychological effects of dietary monotony that can seriously impact traveler morale and cultural enthusiasm after several weeks of consuming essentially the same 5 or 6 dishes in different combinations. Most local restaurants serve variations of identical menus, featuring the same basic ingredients prepared using traditional methods that prioritize cultural authenticity over international variety. Western food options are either completely unavailable or priced at levels that would obliterate budget constraints faster than you can say, pizza margarita. A basic pizza in Ashgabat costs approximately 25 manats, 8 to 10, representing nearly a full week's worth of plav meals or several days of complete nutritional needs if you're shopping intelligently at local markets. The mathematics become brutal quickly, but the compensation lies in discovering that traditional Turkmen food is actually quite delicious and nutritionally complete once you accept that your taste buds are essentially taking a semester abroad in Central Asian flavor profiles. Shopping for groceries reveals fascinating insights into the economic distortions created by political isolation and state-controlled import policies. Basic staples including bread, rice, vegetables, and locally produced items are heavily subsidized and extremely affordable, making fundamental nutrition accessible even to citizens with very limited incomes. However, luxury items including imported chocolate, coffee, alcohol, and processed foods from international brands cost significantly more than equivalent products in major Western cities. This creates a food culture that's simultaneously incredibly affordable and completely limited, forcing creativity and adaptation within very narrow parameters that can actually enhance rather than restrict culinary appreciation once you adjust your expectations accordingly. Dating and romantic relationships in Turkmenistan operate according to social rules and cultural expectations that would confuse a medieval courtship manual and challenge even the most patient international dating expert. Traditional gender roles aren't simply cultural preferences or family suggestions here. They're enforced through complex combinations of family pressure, community expectations, religious influences, and sometimes legal restrictions that make casual dating about as common as snow in the middle of the Karakum Desert. Women in Turkmenistan must navigate an incredibly complex social landscape, where traditional cultural values intersect with modern aspirations under the constant oversight of both extended family networks and state authorities, who take considerable interest in citizens' personal lives and relationship choices. Most women wear traditional Turkmen dresses in public settings. These aren't simple costumes or tourist attractions, but rather beautiful, flowing garments featuring intricate embroidery patterns that actually represent sophisticated communication systems. These designs convey information about regional origins, family histories, marital status, and social position to anyone educated enough to read these visual narratives correctly. The concept of dating as understood and practiced in Western cultures barely exists within current Turkmen social structures. Instead, romantic relationships typically develop through carefully managed family connections, community events, or highly supervised social interactions that involve multiple generations of oversight and approval before any meaningful relationship development can occur. Young people might initially meet at university settings, workplace environments, or community gatherings, but any relationship that shows signs of developing beyond casual friendship must immediately involve extensive family consultations and serious discussions about marriage prospects, financial compatibility, and long-term family planning objectives. The idea of casual dating, living together before marriage, or maintaining romantic relationships without immediate family involvement isn't simply culturally inappropriate or socially awkward. It can result in serious consequences including social ostracism, family rejection, and sometimes legal complications that can affect employment, education, and citizenship status. Marriage arrangements typically involve extensive negotiations between families that consider factors including economic compatibility, regional origins, educational backgrounds, religious observance, political reliability, and sometimes even physical characteristics that might affect the appearance and social status of future children and grandchildren. This doesn't necessarily constitute arranged marriage in the most traditional sense where individual choice is completely eliminated, but it represents heavily guided courtship processes where personal romantic preferences must operate within very clearly defined social, economic, and cultural parameters that prioritize family and community stability over individual emotional satisfaction. Love matches and genuine romantic connections do occur regularly, but they must fit within acceptable social frameworks and receive proper family approval before they can progress toward marriage and family formation. Couples who attempt to circumvent these processes often find themselves facing impossible social and economic pressures that can destroy relationships regardless of genuine emotional compatibility. Women's roles and opportunities vary significantly between urban environments like Ashgabat and rural communities throughout the country's vast desert regions. In the capital city, you'll encounter women working as teachers, doctors, government employees, small business owners, and various professional positions, though always within limits established by cultural traditions and legal restrictions that affect career advancement and workplace behavior. Rural women often maintain more traditionally defined roles centered around family responsibilities, agricultural work, and community leadership positions. But they also frequently exercise more practical autonomy within their households and local communities than urban women, who face more direct government oversight and social scrutiny. Economic realities profoundly affect relationship development and marriage decisions throughout Turkmen society. With severely limited employment opportunities, government-controlled wages, and restricted entrepreneurial possibilities, financial stability becomes a major consideration in marriage negotiations and relationship planning. Men typically must demonstrate their ability to support families financially before marriage becomes a realistic possibility, while women are expected to contribute domestic skills, often continue working to support household incomes and maintain extended family relationships that can provide social and economic security during difficult periods. International relationships and cross-cultural marriages face enormous bureaucratic and legal hurdles that can make love stories feel more like legal nightmares. Marrying a foreign citizen requires extensive government approval processes, mountains of paperwork, financial guarantees, and often results in the Turkmen citizen becoming unable to travel abroad or maintain meaningful contact with international family members. These restrictions create situations where genuine romantic connections literally encounter legal barriers that can be impossible to overcome, regardless of emotional commitment, financial resources, or family support from either side of the relationship. Social gatherings and community celebrations do occur regularly, but they are carefully managed affairs that operate according to strict protocols designed to maintain cultural traditions while avoiding any activities that might be interpreted as politically problematic or socially inappropriate by government authorities or conservative community leaders. Weddings represent major community events that can continue for several days and involve hundreds of guests from multiple generations and extended family networks. These celebrations are incredibly important for maintaining social connections, cultural traditions, and community relationships that provide essential support systems in a society where individual autonomy is limited and family networks remain crucial for economic and social survival. The younger generation approaches romantic relationships with creativity and determination, born of necessity and hope. They develop sophisticated methods of communication and connection, despite technological restrictions, using everything from coded language to carefully planned group activities to maintain relationships within culturally acceptable boundaries while still expressing genuine emotions and building meaningful connections. Technology plays a limited but significant role due to internet restrictions and government monitoring of digital communications, but young people adapt by using whatever platforms function reliably and developing complex systems of digital communication that allow relationship development while avoiding unwanted official attention. What remains remarkable throughout all these restrictions and complications is how genuine affection, partnership, and deep emotional connections continue to develop and flourish within these constraints. Couples learn to build relationships based on extensive communication, shared values, mutual respect, and long-term commitment rather than the more casual dating culture common in societies with greater individual freedom and fewer family obligations. Turkmenistan celebrates its national identity through festivals and public events that masterfully blend authentic, ancient traditions with modern political messaging in ways that are simultaneously fascinating and slightly surreal. To witness as an outsider trying to understand the relationship between genuine culture and government propaganda, Independence Day celebrations in October transform Ashgabat into a spectacular showcase of national pride that would make the parade planners in North Korea take detailed notes and probably feel slightly inadequate about their own organizational capabilities and attention to visual detail. The absolute centerpiece of any major national celebration involves the legendary Akal Teke, horses animals so physically beautiful and historically significant that they appear almost mythical to visitors encountering them for the first time. These horses possess distinctive metallic coats that literally shimmer like spun gold when sunlight hits their perfectly groomed surfaces, and they're considered the most precious national treasure of Turkmenistan, valued above artwork, archaeological artifacts, or natural resources. Watching these magnificent creatures parade through marble streets creates an incredible visual and emotional experience that juxtaposes ancient nomadic culture with modern authoritarian spectacle in ways that are both beautiful and slightly uncomfortable for observers trying to separate authentic cultural appreciation from carefully orchestrated political theater. Carpet festivals represent another source of immense national pride that connects contemporary Turkmen identity to centuries of artistic tradition and cultural heritage that predates current political systems by many generations. Turkmen carpets aren't simply decorative floor coverings or commercial products. They represent sophisticated art forms that carry embedded family histories, regional identities, and cultural symbols that have been transmitted from generation to generation through oral traditions and hands-on training programs. The intricate patterns woven into these carpets are so culturally significant that they appear prominently on the national flag, and master carpet weavers hold social status within their communities equivalent to renowned artists, respected scholars, or religious leaders in other cultural contexts. During these carpet festivals, visitors can observe elderly women demonstrating weaving techniques that haven't changed substantially in centuries, creating carpets so intricate and detailed that a single piece might require months of dedicated work by multiple skilled artisans working together using methods that can't be mechanized or mass-produced using modern industrial techniques. The government actively promotes these events as demonstrations of cultural preservation and national identity, but they also function as genuine celebrations where local communities gather to share traditional skills, family stories, and collective pride in cultural heritage that has survived centuries of political change, foreign conquest, and social transformation. Nowruz celebrations in March provide fascinating insights into Turkmenistan's complex cultural connections to broader Central Asian and Persian traditions that extend far beyond current national borders and political boundaries. Despite the government's heavy emphasis on specifically Turkmen nationalism and cultural distinctiveness, Nowruz festivities reveal the country's multicultural heritage and historical connections to neighboring regions that share similar languages, religions, and cultural practices. Traditional families prepare elaborate special meals, engage in thorough household cleaning rituals, and participate in social customs that predate both Soviet political control and Islamic religious conversion, demonstrating cultural continuity that has persisted despite centuries of political upheaval and forced cultural modification. Spring festivals often center around the preparation and communal sharing of seasonal foods, extended community gatherings in tea houses and family courtyards, and the renewal of social relationships that might have been strained during harsh winter months when travel and social interaction become more difficult due to weather conditions and economic constraints. These celebrations feel significantly more organic and spontaneous than the carefully orchestrated official government festivals, providing visitors with genuine glimpses into authentic Turkmen social life and cultural practices that exist independently of political oversight and official approval. Music and dance performances at various festivals reflect the complex cultural layers and historical influences that characterize modern Turkmen identity. Traditional Turkmen music features distinctive stringed instruments and vocal styles that clearly echo the country's nomadic heritage and historical connections to other Central Asian cultures. But you'll also detect Russian influences from the Soviet educational period and contemporary styles that somehow manage to filter into the country despite cultural restrictions and limited international contact. What makes these festivals particularly interesting for outside observers is how they function simultaneously as authentic cultural preservation activities and carefully managed political performances designed to reinforce government messages about national identity, political stability, and social unity. The government uses these public events to communicate official narratives about Turkmen history, cultural superiority, and political legitimacy, while participants use the same events to maintain genuine cultural connections, strengthen family relationships, and preserve traditional knowledge that might otherwise be lost under pressure from modernization and political control. Religious celebrations present their own unique complexities and contradictions within Turkmenistan's officially secular political system. The population remains predominantly Muslim, creating situations where important religious holidays are celebrated privately within family and community settings, while secular festivals receive public attention, official support, and media coverage. This delicate balance requires careful navigation by both citizens and visitors who want to respect local customs and religious practices without inadvertently crossing political boundaries or creating problems for local hosts who might face consequences for any perceived religious or political activities that attract unwanted government attention. Attempting to survive on exactly $500 in Turkmenistan requires financial planning skills that would impress certified public accountants and creative problem-solving abilities that would challenge professional magicians. The official government exchange rate bears absolutely no resemblance to economic reality, creating a parallel financial universe where identical items cost simultaneously almost nothing and absolutely everything depending entirely on which exchange rate you're using, where you're shopping, and who you happen to be buying from at any particular moment. Accommodation expenses represent your single biggest budget challenge and potential financial disaster if you make poor choices during your first few days in the country. Official hotels in Ashgabat charge international rates that often exceed $100 or $200 per night, costs that would completely obliterate your entire $500 budget within 3 or 4 days while leaving you with no money for food, transportation, or any other basic survival necessities. The practical solution requires finding guest houses, homestays, and informal accommodation arrangements that exist within the gray areas of the tourism economy, operating outside official registration systems, but providing affordable alternatives for budget travelers willing to accept basic amenities and uncertain legal status. A bed in a family guest house typically costs 20 to 30 manats per night, 70 to 12, but locating these unofficial accommodations requires personal connections, language skills, and cultural knowledge that most international tourists don't possess upon arrival. This creates a challenging situation where your accommodation costs depend largely on luck, timing, and your ability to communicate with locals who might be willing to help foreign visitors navigate unofficial systems. Local transportation costs are remarkably affordable if you understand the systems and accept the limitations, but they can become expensive quickly if you rely on tourist-oriented services or fail to learn local protocols and pricing structures that govern daily transportation throughout the country. City buses cost less than 50 cents per ride, making them incredibly budget-friendly options for travelers willing to accept that routes and schedules operate according to logic that seems designed specifically to confuse anyone not born and raised in Turkmenistan. Shared taxis fill transportation gaps for approximately $1 to $3 per trip, depending on distance and destination. But successful use requires negotiation skills and basic language abilities that many visitors lack. The major challenge with public transportation lies not in cost, but in communication and navigation. Most drivers speak limited or no English, and explaining your desired destination becomes an exercise in creative communication, involving hand gestures, broken Russian phrases, smartphone translation apps that work sporadically, and occasionally drawing pictures or maps on paper to convey basic geographic information. Food expenses can vary wildly depending on your dietary choices, cultural adaptability, and willingness to embrace local eating habits rather than seeking familiar international alternatives that may be unavailable or prohibitively expensive when they can be located. Eating exclusively local food purchased from street vendors, market stalls, and neighborhood restaurants, you could maintain adequate nutrition on approximately 3 to 5 per day while actually eating quite well and experiencing authentic Turkmen cuisine. However, adding occasional restaurant meals or seeking any imported items, processed foods, or international brands quickly doubles or triples daily food costs and can destroy budget planning within a few days of poor decision-making. The key to food budget survival lies in completely embracing pilav kebabs, fresh-bred seasonal vegetables, and traditional tea as your primary nutritional foundation, while treating anything else as luxury spending that must be carefully considered and rationed according to your remaining budget and length of stay. Communication costs present interesting challenges that reflect the country's technological limitations and government restrictions on international connectivity. Internet access exists throughout major cities, but requires patience and dramatically lowered expectations about connection speed, website availability, and reliability that most international visitors find frustrating and inadequate for basic communication needs. Internet cafes typically charge 1 to 2 per hour for connections that move slower than dial-up service from the 1990s, making simple tasks like sending emails or checking basic websites time-consuming and expensive relative to the limited functionality provided. Mobile phone service functions more reliably than internet but costs more and offers limited international calling capabilities that may not meet traveler communication requirements. Budget approximately $10–15 per week for basic communication needs, including internet access, local phone service, and occasional international calls, while accepting that maintaining regular contact with family, friends, or business contacts abroad will require significant patience and potentially higher costs than originally anticipated. Shopping for personal necessities reveals the economic distortions created by the country's political isolation and government-controlled import policies. Basic items including soap, toothpaste, simple medications, and locally manufactured goods remain reasonably priced and generally available throughout urban areas. However, anything electronic, branded, imported, or manufactured internationally costs several times what equivalent items would cost in neighboring countries or major international markets. Simple items like electronics adapters, replacement cables, or basic electronic accessories might cost $20 to $30, while identical items cost $3–5 in Kazakhstan or other nearby countries with more open economic systems. Entertainment and cultural activities generally operate on completely different economic scales that make them accessible even to budget travelers operating under severe financial constraints. Visiting museums, cultural sites, and historical locations typically costs $2–5 per admission, making them affordable options for travelers interested in learning about local culture and history. However, many of the most interesting and significant cultural sites require special permits approved, guided tours, or advance arrangements that can cost $50 to $100 or more, creating situations where seeing the country's most important attractions might consume your entire budget while leaving no money for basic survival necessities. Hidden costs that consistently surprise budget travelers include visa fees, regional travel permits, mandatory guide requirements for certain attractions, and various bureaucratic expenses that are completely non-negotiable regardless of your financial situation or travel preferences. These official expenses can easily add $100 to $200 to your total costs, and they must be paid in advance or upon arrival regardless of your budget constraints or planned activities. Planning for these bureaucratic expenses becomes absolutely essential for realistic budget preparation and successful trip completion. What makes the economic reality particularly complex and frustrating is the extensive informal economy that operates parallel to official systems throughout the country. Many services, accommodations, transportation options, and cultural experiences are available through personal connections and word-of-mouth networks that operate completely outside official channels and government oversight. Access to this informal economy can dramatically reduce your costs and improve your travel experience, but it requires time, patience, language skills, and cultural understanding that most short-term visitors don't possess and can't easily develop during brief visits to the country. Transportation throughout Turkmenistan operates according to principles and logic that would challenge quantum physicists and confuse professional urban planners who specialize in creating efficient movement systems for large populations. The government has invested enormous resources in transportation infrastructure that looks impressive and modern, but often serves purposes more closely related to national prestige and political symbolism than practical transportation needs of citizens or visitors. Ashgabat's public transportation system centers around modern buses that are clean, comfortable, air-conditioned, and remarkably affordable for passengers who can figure out where these buses are actually going and whether their destinations have any meaningful relationship to places you might want to visit during your stay in the capital city. The buses themselves represent impressive examples of modern public transportation: well-maintained vehicles with comfortable seating, effective climate control, and reasonable passenger capacity. The fundamental challenge lies in understanding route systems that seem designed by urban planners who never actually needed to travel anywhere specific, and scheduling that operates according to logic that remains mysterious even to long-term residents. The metro system in Ashgabat deserves special recognition because it represents simultaneously the most beautiful and least practical subway system ever constructed by human beings. The stations feature elaborate decorations including marble surfaces, crystal chandeliers, and artistic installations that wouldn't seem out of place in major royal palaces or world-class art museums. The trains themselves are modern, efficient, comfortable, and operate with impressive reliability and punctuality. The entire system contains exactly one line with a handful of stations that connect locations most tourists will never need to visit and most residents rarely use for practical daily transportation needs. It's like someone decided to construct a magnificent transportation system for a theoretical city that exists only in urban planning fantasies and architectural drawings rather than addressing the actual transportation needs of people who live and work in the real Ashgabat that exists outside government planning offices. Taxi services provide greater flexibility and practical utility, but require negotiation skills that would serve travelers well in international diplomatic situations or complex business transactions. Official taxis equipped with functioning meters are extremely rare throughout the country. Most transportation happens through informal arrangements with drivers who quote prices based on complex calculations involving distance, time of day, your apparent wealth level, current fuel costs, and possibly astrological considerations. Learning to negotiate fair taxi fares becomes absolutely essential for budget survival and basic mobility throughout your stay. This process involves developing understanding of reasonable price ranges, learning basic negotiation techniques, and accepting that transportation costs will always include subjective elements that can't be eliminated through logical discussion or reference to official rate schedules. Intercity transportation reveals the country's vast geographic distances and severely limited options for movement between major population centers. Buses connect major cities and towns, but operate according to schedules that prioritize government convenience and fuel efficiency over passenger convenience or tourism needs. The journey from Ashgabat to Turkmenbashi on the Caspian Sea coast requires approximately 6 hours of travel through desert landscape that alternates between monotonously empty and surprisingly spectacular, depending on your appreciation for vast open spaces, dramatic geological formations, and complete absence of human activity for hundreds of miles in every direction. Train service exists throughout the country, but functions more as nostalgic tribute to Soviet-era transportation planning than practical means of travel for people who actually need to reach specific destinations within reasonable time periods. The trains are slow, infrequent, often delayed by hours or days, and operate according to schedules that seem designed to test passenger patience rather than facilitate efficient movement. However, train travel provides unique opportunities to meet local residents, observe countryside that's completely invisible from major highways, and experience a style of travel that has remained essentially unchanged since Soviet times. Additionally, train tickets remain incredibly affordable. A cross-country journey might cost only $5 making rail travel an attractive option for budget travelers who have unlimited time and patience for transportation adventures. The most surreal aspect of transportation involves extensive restrictions on private vehicle ownership and operation. Car ownership requires government approval processes, extensive documentation, and compliance with regulations that can change without notice or apparent logic. For several years, dark-colored automobiles were completely prohibited in Ashgabat because government officials determined that they absorbed too much solar heat and created depressing visual impressions that reflected poorly on the city as image. White vehicles became mandatory throughout the capital, creating streets that resembled massive conventions of dental professionals or medical equipment suppliers rather than normal urban traffic patterns. Rental cars for international tourists are theoretically available but practically challenging to obtain and use. International rental companies don't operate within Turkmenistan, and local alternatives require extensive paperwork, security deposits that often exceed most travelers' total budgets, and restrictions on destinations and driving areas that severely limit practical utility. Most tourists rely on hired drivers with their own vehicles, which costs significantly more than independent travel, but eliminates bureaucratic complications and provides local knowledge that can be invaluable for navigation, cultural interpretation, and avoiding inadvertent violations of regulations that visitors might not know exist. Regional travel throughout the country requires special permits and often mandatory professional guides, transforming simple transportation into complex logistical operations that require advanced planning, official approvals, and significant expense. Visiting attractions like the Darvaza gas crater requires not just transportation, but government permission, certified guide services, and sometimes overnight camping arrangements that must be approved and documented in advance. What makes transportation particularly fascinating is how it reflects the government's comprehensive approach to controlling population movement and monitoring citizen activities. Internal passport systems and regional travel permits create bureaucratic barriers that discourage spontaneous travel and ensure that population movement can be tracked and regulated through administrative systems rather than direct prohibition. Despite all these challenges and restrictions, Turkmen hospitality often provides unexpected solutions to transportation problems that official systems can't address. Local residents routinely offer assistance to travelers, share taxi costs to reduce expenses, and provide guidance that helps visitors navigate complex systems of rules and regulations that govern movement throughout the country. Turkmenistan's tourist attractions exist within a parallel universe where genuine natural wonders compete directly with government-created architectural fantasies for visitor attention, creating travel experiences that consistently blur the boundaries between authentic tourism and elaborately staged political theater designed to impress international observers and reinforce domestic propaganda messages. The Darvaza gas crater stands as the country's most famous and legitimately spectacular natural attraction, and after witnessing this phenomenon firsthand, it's impossible to argue with its reputation or significance. This 230-foot-wide hole in the desert has been burning continuously since 1971, creating a scene that literally looks like a portal to another dimension, especially during nighttime visits when the flames illuminate the surrounding darkness in ways that no photograph or video can adequately capture. Visiting Darvaza requires a 4-hour drive through completely empty desert terrain, special government permits that must be obtained in advance, and usually an overnight camping experience that combines spectacular natural beauty with the surreal experience of sleeping next to what locals accurately call the door to hell. But accessing this natural wonder reveals the fundamental complexity of tourism throughout Turkmenistan. Independent travel to Darvaza is theoretically possible but practically impossible. You need official permissions, approved professional guides, and transportation arranged exclusively through registered tour operators who have government authorization to conduct tourism activities in restricted areas. The bureaucratic requirements transform a simple desert camping trip into a logistical operation that typically costs $200–400, depending on group size, accommodation arrangements, and additional services included in tour packages. For budget travelers, this represents a significant portion of total available funds, but the experience generally justifies the expense for visitors who can afford it. Ashgabat itself functions as a massive tourist attraction that's simultaneously impressive and deeply unsettling to experience firsthand. The city holds multiple Guinness World Records for containing the highest concentration of white marble buildings anywhere on Earth, and walking through downtown areas feels like touring an elaborate movie set or theme park designed by architects with unlimited budgets and questionable aesthetic judgment. The architecture is undeniably spectacular from purely visual perspectives. Massive buildings covered in gleaming white marble, elaborate golden decorations, crystal elements, and design features that would be expensive even for luxury hotels or royal palaces. However, the empty streets, obvious surveillance systems, and artificial atmosphere create an environment that feels more like a museum display than a functioning city where people actually live and work. The ancient city of Merv represents Turkmenistan's most significant connection to legitimate historical importance and international cultural heritage. This UNESCO World Heritage Site preserves archaeological remains from one of the Silk Road's most important trading centers, with ruins and artifacts spanning more than 2,000 years of continuous human settlement and commercial activity. Unlike Ashgabat's modern marble constructions, Merv connects visitors to authentic historical significance that predates current political systems by many centuries and demonstrates Turkmenistan's role in ancient international trade networks that connected China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe through overland caravan routes. However, accessing historical sites often involves restrictions and limitations that prevent genuine exploration and cultural education. Photography may be prohibited or require special permits that cost additional money. Guided tours follow rigid scripts that emphasize government-approved historical narratives rather than objective archaeological evidence, and independent exploration is actively discouraged through both official regulations and practical barriers that make self-guided visits difficult or impossible. The Yangikala Canyons provide stunning natural beauty that rivals famous geological formations in Utah, Arizona, or other internationally recognized destinations, but they're located in remote desert areas that require special transportation arrangements, regional travel permits, and often multi-day camping expeditions that significantly increase costs and complexity for visitors operating under budget constraints. These canyons feature dramatically colored rock formations, impressive cliff faces, and landscapes that would satisfy any photographer's dreams. Assuming you can obtain permission to photograph them and access locations where the best views are available to visitors who complete all necessary bureaucratic requirements. Museums throughout Ashgabat showcase combinations of genuine cultural artifacts and carefully curated exhibitions that promote official interpretations of Turkmen history, culture, and national identity. The National Museum contains impressive collections of archaeological discoveries, traditional crafts, historical documents, and cultural exhibits that provide valuable insights into authentic Turkmen heritage and Central Asian history. However, museum presentations consistently emphasize themes and interpretations that support current political narratives rather than providing objective historical analysis or encouraging critical thinking about complex historical questions and cultural development processes that might challenge official government positions on sensitive topics. Religious sites present particular challenges and opportunities for international visitors who want to understand authentic spiritual and cultural traditions that remain important to local populations, despite official government emphasis on secular nationalism and political loyalty over religious observance. While Turkmenistan maintains official secular policies, the population remains predominantly Muslim, and several important mosques, shrines, and religious sites exist throughout the country. Visiting these locations as a tourist requires sensitivity to local customs, respect for religious practices, and often special arrangements that ensure appropriate behavior and cultural understanding. The Caspian Sea coastline offers beaches and resort facilities that feel like they belong in a completely different country with different climate, culture, and economic systems. Turkmenbashi, the main port city, features Soviet-era beach resorts alongside newer developments designed to serve domestic tourism and provide recreation opportunities for government officials and privileged citizens who can afford coastal vacations. The contrast between desert isolation and coastal relaxation creates interesting travel experiences for visitors willing to navigate transportation challenges, obtain necessary permits, and accept accommodation options that may not meet international luxury standards but provide genuine opportunities to experience different aspects of Turkmen geography and lifestyle. What proves particularly frustrating for many international visitors is the extensive list of theoretically accessible sites and attractions that remain practically impossible to visit without extensive advance planning. Significant financial resources or personal connections to local tour operators who understand complex permit and permission systems that govern tourism activities throughout the country. Personal safety throughout Turkmenistan presents a fascinating paradox where traditional criminal activity is virtually non-existent, but political missteps can create serious problems. For visitors who inadvertently violate cultural norms or government regulations that may not be clearly explained or universally understood by international tourists unfamiliar with local customs and legal requirements. The country maintains extremely low rates of theft, assault, violent crime, and other security concerns that typically worry international travelers in most destinations around the world. This remarkable safety record isn't accidental or coincidental. It results directly from extensive surveillance systems and comprehensive social controls that make criminal activity extremely risky for potential perpetrators who understand the serious consequences of antisocial behavior. Citizens throughout the country understand that theft, violence, or other criminal activities will result in swift detection and severe punishment, creating a society where leaving personal belongings unattended rarely results in loss, and walking alone during nighttime hours poses minimal physical danger from other people, making Turkmenistan one of the safest destinations on Earth for traditional security concerns that affect travelers in most other countries. However, the same governmental systems that effectively eliminate conventional crime create entirely different categories of safety concerns for international visitors who might inadvertently violate political restrictions, cultural expectations, or legal requirements that are not clearly communicated to tourists during visa application processes or upon arrival in the country. Photography near government buildings, military installations, infrastructure facilities, or even random street scenes that might reflect unfavorably on the country's international image can result in detention, interrogation, equipment confiscation, and potentially serious legal consequences that could affect your ability to leave the country according to your planned schedule. Discussions about politics, criticism of government policies, economic conditions, or even casual comments comparing Turkmenistan unfavorably to other countries can attract unwanted official attention from security personnel who monitor public conversations and report suspicious activities to authorities who take these matters very seriously. Healthcare quality varies dramatically between urban centers like Ashgabat and rural communities throughout the country's vast desert regions. The capital city maintains several modern hospitals and medical clinics that provide reasonable healthcare for common medical problems, routine treatments, And basic emergency care, though specialized treatments or advanced medical procedures may not meet international standards that patients from developed countries expect. Basic medications, including pain relievers, antibiotics, and common treatments, are generally available through pharmacies and medical facilities, but specific prescription medications or specialized treatments may be impossible to obtain, requiring travelers with chronic medical conditions to bring adequate supplies for their entire visit, plus additional reserves for potential travel delays or emergency situations. Medical costs for international tourists can be significant, and health insurance policies from other countries may not be accepted, recognized, or honored by local healthcare providers who require immediate payment for services rendered. Emergency medical evacuation to neighboring countries with more advanced healthcare systems represents a major expense that could easily cost thousands of dollars and require complex logistical arrangements that may be difficult to organize during medical emergencies. Budgeting for potential medical expenses becomes essential for any extended stay in Turkmenistan, particularly for travelers with existing health conditions, medication requirements, or higher risk factors that increase the likelihood of requiring medical attention during their visit to the country. The education system throughout Turkmenistan reveals interesting aspects of daily life under comprehensive governmental control that affects how citizens think, communicate, and interact with international visitors who may have different perspectives on politics, history, and social organization than what's taught in local schools and universities. Educational institutions emphasize Turkmen history, culture, language, and national identity while providing limited exposure to international perspectives, critical thinking, methodologies, or analytical approaches that might encourage students to question official narratives or develop independent opinions about complex social and political questions. What is particularly interesting for international visitors is observing how local citizens navigate these comprehensive restrictions while maintaining normal social relationships, family connections, and community activities that provide meaning and satisfaction despite limitations on political expression and intellectual freedom that might seem overwhelming to people from societies with greater individual liberty. People throughout Turkmenistan have developed a sophisticated understanding of which topics can be discussed openly in public settings, which require careful language and coded communication, and which should be completely avoided in conversations with strangers or in locations where surveillance systems might monitor discussions and report sensitive content to authorities who investigate potential security threats. Environmental health concerns include extreme temperatures during summer months that can cause heat stroke, dehydration, and other heat-related medical emergencies, particularly for visitors unaccustomed to desert climates and high temperatures that regularly exceed 120 degrees in direct sunlight during peak summer periods. Limited access to clean drinking water in rural areas, air quality issues in industrial regions, and occasional sandstorms that can affect respiratory health and transportation. Safety require preparation and awareness for travelers planning to visit areas outside major urban centers where infrastructure and medical services may be limited or unavailable. Internet and communication restrictions affect more than entertainment and social media access. They limit travelers' ability to access international health information, travel advisories, emergency contact services, and communication with family members or employers who might need to provide assistance during medical emergencies or unexpected travel complications. Planning for communication limitations becomes essential for any travel that might involve medical emergencies, transportation delays, or other situations where international assistance might be necessary, but difficult to arrange due to technological restrictions and limited internet connectivity throughout much of the country. Food safety generally follows reasonable standards in urban restaurants and established food vendors, but rural dining options and street food require normal precautions regarding water quality, food, freshness, proper cooking temperatures, and sanitation practices that prevent foodborne illnesses that could seriously affect travel plans and budget resources. The limited variety of available foods can also create nutritional challenges for extended stays, particularly for travelers with dietary restrictions, food allergies, or medical conditions that require specific nutritional planning, that may be difficult to maintain using only locally available ingredients and cooking methods. Obtaining a Turkmenistan visa requires levels of patience that would impress Zen Buddhist monks and paperwork documentation skills that could qualify you for advanced degrees in international law or professional bureaucratic navigation. The visa application process typically begins several months before intended travel dates and involves documentation requirements that seem specifically designed to discourage all but the most determined and persistent international visitors. Tourist visas require official invitations from government-registered tour operators, detailed itineraries that must be approved by multiple government agencies, and financial guarantees demonstrating that applicants possess sufficient funds for their entire planned stay, plus additional reserves for unexpected expenses or emergency situations that might arise during their visit. Independent travel remains theoretically possible according to official government policies, but practical implementation proves extremely challenging due to comprehensive restrictions that require guided tours for most significant attractions. Government-approved transportation arrangements and advance permits for regional travel that can be difficult or impossible to obtain without professional tour operator assistance. The invitation process alone typically requires 4 to 6 weeks of processing time and costs $100 before applicants can even begin the actual visa application procedures. Tour operators must register complete itineraries with relevant government agencies, specify detailed accommodation arrangements, and provide written guarantees that visitors will comply with all local laws, cultural expectations, and travel restrictions throughout their entire stay in the country. Visa applications require extensive documentation, including current medical certificates, detailed financial statements, employment, verification letters, complete travel histories for the previous several years, and sometimes additional materials that vary depending on applicant nationality, intended length of stay, and planned activities during the visit. Application processing times vary significantly depending on your nationality, with citizens from some countries facing additional restrictions, enhanced scrutiny, or supplementary requirements that can extend processing periods indefinitely without clear explanations or guaranteed completion dates that allow reliable travel planning. Border crossing procedures operate according to protocols that prioritize comprehensive security screening over efficiency or passenger convenience. Arrival processes involve extensive document verification, thorough luggage inspections, detailed questioning about travel purposes, financial resources, planned activities, and sometimes examination of electronic devices including phones, cameras, and computers. Certain items including political materials, unauthorized maps, religious texts not approved by government authorities, or publications that might be considered culturally inappropriate or politically sensitive may be confiscated during arrival inspections, potentially creating problems for visitors who inadvertently bring prohibited materials without realizing they violate local regulations. Registration requirements continue after successful arrival and border clearance. International tourists must register with local police authorities within 72 hours of arrival, provide detailed information about accommodation arrangements, and maintain current documentation proving legal status throughout their entire stay in the country. Hotels and official guest houses automatically handle registration procedures for registered guests, but alternative accommodation arrangements, including homestays, private rentals, or informal lodging options, require manual registration processes that can be time-consuming, confusing, and potentially problematic if not completed correctly according to official requirements. Photography restrictions extend far beyond obvious security targets like government buildings and military installations to include infrastructure facilities, transportation systems, and sometimes even general street scenes or cultural sites that might reflect unfavorably on the country's international image or contradict official narratives about economic development and social progress. The specific rules governing photography aren't always clearly defined or consistently applied, leaving international visitors to make educated guesses about which images might create problems during departure inspections when officials review photographic content and question visitors about their experiences and impressions during their stay.